Let's talk about this with Greg Jarrett, Fox News legal analyst, and Molly Hemingway, editor-in-chief of The Federalist. Welcome to both of you. Molly Hemingway, you first. What do you make of this thing? I don't know. Treachery, sordid, subversion. I mean, there's all kinds of adjectives can be used. But this was one unsavory, sordid part of American history, that's for sure. How do you see it, Molly?
Objectively speaking, this is the worst scandal we've ever seen from our government in our nation's history. And these recent disclosures of information, I'm sure Greg will agree with me, as people who have covered the Russia collusion hoax for many years, are so helpful at understanding precisely how the hoax got going. And yes, it is this intelligence community assessment that is ordered by Obama at a time when actually the intelligence is suggesting the opposite of what that ICA eventually says, the intelligence community assessment. And what we learned from these documents is that people within the intelligence community were pretty much screaming from the rooftops that they did not believe that the intelligence supported the idea that Putin was trying to help Trump, and yet Brennan and other bad actors just shut them down, ignored them, told them that they were all wet, and just pushed through anyway so that this thing could get going. And of course, it was so damaging to that first Trump administration. It's a really big deal.
I mean, Greg Jarrett, a lot of people, I mean, look, I'm no expert. You wrote a book on the subject. Molly's written about it. I'm just saying a lot of people, even in the intelligence area, even whistleblowers coming to the front now, they said this thing should have been dead and buried a long time ago. The question is, all right, Brennan, sure. Comey, sure. Okay, they probably wanted to resuscitate it. What role did former President Barack Obama play if there was a resuscitation of these phony charges that were, whatever we're going to call them, treacherous or sordid or subversion or whatever? What role did he play?
Role in all of this, overseeing it. And I think President Trump's venom is understandable as directed against Barack Obama. And Comey, Brennan, and Clapper, I call them the three stooges of Obama's national security team. You know, the documents show that all of them were aiding and abetting the scheme cooked up by Hillary Clinton to frame Trump as a Russian asset, even though they knew at the outset it was all fabricated. Here's the thing, Larry. Instead of stepping forward and telling the truth to the American people in the summer of 2016 when they knew it, they kept silent. And they watched as James Comey launched his damaging investigation of Trump without any credible evidence. And these new declassified documents show how they scuttled an intel briefing that concluded there was no Russian interference and conspired to replace it with an intelligence assessment that said just the opposite. And then, to make matters worse, they inserted the phony dossier into that intelligence assessment, pretending it was true, even though the FBI had already debunked it. Clapper then leaked the dossier to CNN, and the mainstream media was often running, convicting Trump in the court of public opinion without ever a shred of any plausible evidence. It truly was the dirtiest trick in American political history.
You know, Molly, it just, I mean, my history here is imperfect, to be sure. But as I recall the story, even before Mr. Trump was inaugurated in January of 2017, even before he was actually sworn in, Comey meets with him, Brennan meets with him, I don't know, Clapper was probably there. I'm not sure who all was there, but those guys were there. And they're telling him he's in deep trouble because of X, Y, and Z, even though X, Y, and Z were a pack of lies and that they had resuscitated those lies. And then later on, we found out that whistleblowers also said that they're a bunch of lies. But they actually went in before he was actually sworn in as president and told him they're going to go after him, and then just plagued most of his first term. I mean, really? How is this possible? How can this go unpunished? That's what I'm asking. I'm not the lawyer. I'm not a cop. I'm a journalist. I just want to know, how can this possibly go unpunished?
Well, again, Obama may have immunity for what he did, but that is what is so interesting about this. That meeting that you're talking about was where they delivered this intelligence assessment to Obama and to Trump. The ordering of that assessment was done by Obama precisely so that it could be briefed to Trump and that it could be leaked that it was briefed to Trump. This is what got the entire Russia collusion hoax going. Normally, an intelligence assessment would take months, maybe years to put together. They put it together in 2 weeks, precisely so that CNN could leak the details of this dossier and that Trump's presidency could be destroyed. Efforts to destroy a presidency are seditious, and this is a very serious issue for these leaders in the intel community. And I think that they should be much more worried about the legal consequences, unfortunately, than Obama should.
Yes, well, I love that word, seditious. Got to put that back into the riff. That's a fabulous word. I was groping for that word for the last hour or so. It's absolutely perfect, the word seditious. And Greg Jarrett, I mean, Steele was a lying paid informant who was actually fired. Now, they built that up. Hillary's campaign or the Hillary Foundation or something financed this whole thing. But Brennan knew that, didn't he? Comey knew that, didn't he? Did Obama know that the Steele dossier was a fraud to begin with?
There were 2 meetings. July 28th was the first one at the White House. Obama was there, Comey, Brennan, Clapper, Biden. And, you know, Brennan had rushed over to tell him what Hillary had done, invented this thing, and had commissioned a dossier, was financing it. You know, Steele was triple dipping. He was getting paid by the FBI, by Hillary Clinton's campaign, and the DNC. And at one point in time, you know, the FBI found out he was lying, so they fired him. Well, did Comey tell the FISA court when he sought those warrants to spy? No. He, in fact, vouched for Steele, saying he was credible and reliable, and didn't tell the judges, oh, by the way, we fired him, and oh, by the way, we've also debunked the dossier. No, they used it to manipulate the justice system for surveillance purposes on the Trump campaign.
Molly Hemingway, I'm going to jump shift. I'm going to jump shift. The same crowd, the same group of lovelies was at it again with the Hunter Biden laptop cover-up. Same group. Clapper in the lead, Brennan in the lead, 51 intel people. All right, now this is in September-ish of the late September of the 2020 election. They put together, 51 intel people say it was all Russian disinformation. Here we go again. Russia, Russia, Russia continues to play. And they continue to lie. And it turns out the FBI had the damn thing and knew all about it, as did other people. And yet this lie and this cover-up and this left-wing media collusion continued. So, you know, I'm just thinking as we're talking about this, and I'm reading about this in recent days, Molly Hemingway, no wonder President Trump gets pretty angry about this stuff. Here it goes. I mean, you can't blame the guy. I know this is a providential presidency. He's there because God wanted to save him. I get all that. But sometimes you're allowed to get angry. I mean, here it goes all over again. And he believes his own Justice Department should have an objective, analytical view of this whole story. You can't blame him for getting a little angry. Can you, Molly Hemingway? Really?
Well, Larry, not just the president, but a lot of Americans are livid about this as well.
Yes.
And I think it's worth remembering that none of this would be possible without a complicit media that willingly participate in these info ops perpetrated by bad actors in the intelligence community. Some of the same people who uncritically regurgitated the Russia collusion hoax also uncritically regurgitated the lie that Hunter Biden's evidence of family business corruption was a Russian plant. And they do it with other situations as well. They have destroyed Americans' trust, whatever trust they should have had, in the intelligence community because of how they've politicized things and because of how the media have gone along with this. And instead of getting awards, they should be ignored or, in fact, I think maybe some of their role in the Russia collusion hoax might need to be investigated as well.
Seditious, Molly. It's a terrific word. Wish I had thought of it, but we're going to put it to work, give you full faith and credit for it. Thanks to both of you. It's a pleasure to see you both again. Molly Hemingway, Greg Jarrett, we appreciate it very, very much.
Yes, the Department of Justice confirming it has received a criminal referral from DNI Tulsi Gabbard regarding bombshells that the Obama administration manufactured the Russia collusion narrative with Donald Trump, both before and after the 2016 election. The DNI told me initial intelligence showed Russia did not try to change the outcome of the election, and the Obama team knew that. The knowledge was pulled from the president's daily briefing due to what they called updated guidance. The next day, top national security officials met with Obama's cabinet, where President Obama asked not if, but how Russia tried to upend the election. Here's then President Obama speaking from the briefing room back in 2016. Watch.
At the beginning of the summer, we're alerted to the possibility that the DNC has been hacked. And I immediately order law enforcement as well as our intelligence teams to find out everything about it. If you started seeing effects on the election, you might want to take this into account. We allowed law enforcement and the intelligence community to do its job without political influence. When we had a consensus around what had happened, we announced it, not through the White House, not through me, but rather through the intelligence communities that had actually carried out these investigations.
Did Clinton lose because of the hacking?
I'm going to let all the political pundits in this town have a long discussion about what happened in the election.
Joining me now is Ohio Congressman Jim Jordan, the chairman of the House Judiciary Committee. Mr. Chairman, always a pleasure. Good to see you. What do you make of watching the deja vu of Barack Obama back in 2016?
Well, I think the former president used the term updated guidance. I think that's a fancy way of saying we changed the story and we did it for political reasons, because that's what it looks like. Never forget, there's 3 key dates here, Maria. December 9th is when they have this meeting in the White House. Clapper, Brennan, McCabe, Comey, the president, they're all there, and they say, okay, we're not going to accept the intelligence community assessment. We're going to change that. And President Obama was just alluding to that. And then you have the date January 3rd. A few weeks later, Chuck Schumer goes on one of the Sunday shows and says, talking about then President-elect Trump, he says, if you mess with the intelligence community, they have 6 ways from Sunday at getting back at you. And then 3 days later, January 6th, they all go up to Trump Tower to give President Trump what he believes is his incoming defensive briefing as the new, as the president-elect. He thinks he's getting the normal defensive briefing. Instead, it's a setup. They go up there and talk to him about this, and then Comey tells him about the dossier that they already know is baloney. They know it's not true, came from the Clinton campaign and everything else, but they brief him on it so that when that information gets leaked, it has added credibility, because now it was so important that the FBI talked to the president-elect, the press has got to report it, and off and running goes the Russia collusion false narrative for the next 2 years. It was all to undermine President Trump and his presidency. And God bless Tulsi for sending this to the DOJ. I hope they dig into this. I mean, I hope that they go after this, because I think this is what it was, a conspiracy to undermine the first term of President Trump.
Yeah, but look, at the time, the mainstream media went with it, hook, line, and sinker, and of course, much of the media blasted it across the world. Not here, of course. We saw through it right away and reported accordingly. Yeah. But, we've been calling for accountability now since then. It's almost 10 years, Congressman. So it now falls to AG Pam Bondi and FBI Director Kash Patel on whether or not anything will actually be done about it. What are the odds?
Yeah. Well, I think they are digging into this, and I think that the facts are strong. Here's some other evidence I think is important. This was a setup when they went up there on January 6th to Trump Tower and gave President Trump this briefing. Yeah. It was a setup because a few weeks later they did the same thing to Michael Flynn, and Jim Comey then bragged about it. He said, when we went to the White House, he said we should have called the White House counsel. We should have let him know. We should have talked about this. He should have had a lawyer. All this should have been happening, but they just said, no, we thought it was a new administration. We could get in, we could get out, we could ask him questions. And there's even email correspondence amongst FBI agents from that time with General Flynn where they say, what's our goal? Are we trying to get him to lie? What's our objective here? They were setting up Michael Flynn just like they tried to set up the President of the United States. So this is what this whole operation was about. And again, let's hope that they dig into this and get all this information out there. And if they can prove that there's a crime, I hope they move forward with it.
Now, is this why they raided Mar-a-Lago in 2022? Because they wanted these documents that were sure to be declassified?
I don't know. I do think when you go back to this, what we're talking about in 2016, 2017, it's about a 30-day time period between that December 9th meeting, 2016, and when they go up to, up to Trump Tower and do this briefing. I do think this is when the weaponization of government really began. This is when they said, forget the election, we're going to try to undermine his presidency now. It was bad enough what they tried to do spying on his campaign during the 2016 campaign, but now they're trying to undermine him after he's already won. So I do think that's when it all began.
Yeah, so, I mean, you know, it's interesting because the bulk of these declassified documents reveal that, number one, they knew that the dossier was fake. They knew it was made up. And also they revealed that the FBI did not really investigate former Secretary of State Hillary Clinton for her private email server. Right? So both of those things were happening at the same time, and it was during a contest between the two players, Hillary Clinton versus Donald Trump. Senate Judiciary Committee Chairman Chuck Grassley said under Comey's leadership, the FBI failed to perform fundamental investigative work and left key pieces of evidence on the cutting room floor. So is that the gist of this 10 years later, that they tried to take down Trump by making up and manufacturing this story that was not true? They knew it wasn't true, but they pushed it through and let it go viral across the world, while at the same time completely ignoring her use of a private server who she kept in her house, and that was quite dangerous. Tell us why.
Yeah, they spied on an opposing party's presidential campaign. Yeah. And the evidence they used to get the warrant to spy on them was the Clinton campaign hired the law firm Perkins Coie, who hired Fusion GPS, a Democrat public relations firm, who hired a foreigner, Christopher Steele, who put together the garbage that became the dossier. And then they used that dossier to go spy on the other party's campaign. Meanwhile, they didn't go after Hillary Clinton for her emails and everything else she did from the server. That's what they did. And then when that didn't work, they said, oh, now we're going to undermine his presidency by concocting this story, going up to Trump Tower, giving him the defensive briefing that he's supposed to get. President Trump thinks that's what's happening, when in fact it's a setup, just like they set Michael Flynn up 3 weeks later. That's what this group did. And again, Tulsi now is highlighting the underlying intelligence and said there was nothing there. But the meeting in Obama's office, they all decided to change that. No. We're not going to send out that initial intelligence community assessment. We're going to put together a new one that will allow us to do what I just described.
Well, look, Hillary Clinton was ultimately accused of mishandling highly classified information while using a private email server set up in her home. In 2016, the FBI suggested to the DOJ that she should not face prosecution ahead of the presidential election. So there, I guess they found religion on not getting involved in a presidential election. But look, at the end of the day, this has been an exhausting 10 years because of all of these shenanigans, Congressman. You know that. You've been living it. So have I, and the audience as well. So how is anybody supposed to trust that there's actual, real, work going on and honest work, and it's not all politics? I mean, you have to remove the people, don't you? Who should be getting fired? Putting indictments and prosecutions aside, who needs to get fired and leave Congress for all of these lies?
Well, I do think that I've said this multiple times. I do think it's night and day compared to the kind of work you're seeing from Attorney General Bondi, Todd Blanche, Kash Patel, Dan Bongino at the Justice Department, compared to Merrick Garland and Christopher Wray. But this whole pattern that we've seen of going after President Trump, they spied on his campaign, then they tried to undermine his presidency with what I just described. Then it was the whole Mueller investigation for 2 years. Then in the 2020 election, it was the 51 former intel officials, Clapper, Brennan, signing this crazy letter saying it was a Russian information operation when they had the Hunter Biden laptop. They knew it was real. And then once that happens, when he's running again in 24, it's Alvin Bragg, Fonnie Willis, Jack Smith, and all the things they did there. It has never stopped. But where it started is what Tulsi is now bringing forward, stuff we suspected. We had some of the evidence, but she has even more. And that's why we need to go back there and dig into this, because this is where it all began.
Yeah, no, I understand. These are the two biggest scandals that anybody has ever seen. The first one being Russia collusion and a sitting president trying to stop an incoming president, Obama trying to stop Trump, and then the cover-up of Joe Biden's mental capacity and the use of the auto pen. Who the heck was running the country in the last 4 years? So now we hear from the former first son, Hunter Biden, returning to the limelight over the weekend in this new 3-hour interview. Here's one more of the bizarre takes on what he is criticizing of President Trump's immigration policy. Watch this.
That people are really upset about illegal immigration. You. How do you think your hotel room gets cleaned? How do you think you got food on your table? Who do you think washes your dishes? If I became president, I would pick up the phone and call the president of El Salvador and say, you either send them back or I'm going to invade.
Well, I mean, it's hard to understand with all those F-bombs in there, Congressman, but your reaction to Hunter Biden now coming out and cursing everybody out.
Yeah, I don't think he's ever going to become president. I think he said if I become president, I was going to do something. I don't know that that's likely to happen in this country, and thank goodness for that. No, I mean, this is the left talking. He's part of the left. I mean, what President Trump is doing is exactly what he campaigned on, and the American people appreciate it. We now have a secure border, which we didn't have before. The American people appreciate President Trump, maybe more than any elected official in my lifetime, does what he said he was going to do, does exactly what the American people elected him to do. He said he was going to secure the border. He did. He said he was going to have NATO countries kick in more for defense. They are. He said Iran wasn't going to get a nuclear weapon. That operation was so successful there, and on. He said he was going to cut taxes. We did that. I mean, on and on it goes. So I appreciate that. I think the American people do. What they don't appreciate is Hunter Biden and some of the things his family did, his dad did, while he was president.
Yeah. Oh, well, it certainly has been a very successful 6 months. Congrats to you and your colleagues, and certainly President Trump is riding a high on all of this. But Hunter Biden's cursing everybody out, I guess. Congressman, it's good to see you this morning. Thank you. Jim Jordan is the chairman of the House Judiciary Committee. We'll be right back. Federal Reserve Chairman Jay Powell facing now a criminal referral as scrutiny ramps up over the $2.5 billion renovation of the Federal Reserve buildings. U.S. Federal Housing Finance Agency Director Bill Pulte did his own investigation outside of the building to gauge what progress has been made. Watch.
All right, everyone, they're here getting ready to put up some scaffolding. As I said, they have concrete that they're putting in, got some new steel that they're putting in, some new rebar. You know, I've spent my whole life in construction. It's very hard for me to believe that you could spend $2.5 billion just on concrete and steel and some of this other stuff that they're doing. Back at another gate, middle of the day here, you'd think a lot of construction workers would be here. This is, I guess, entry and exit. I don't see any workers in this area, so we only saw 6 workers over there, only saw a handful over there. Where's Jerome Powell? Where did Jerome Powell put the $2.5 billion? This guy's supposed to be the money manager for the world's biggest economy, and it doesn't even look like he can run a construction site. So something doesn't smell right here. Something is very, very bad.
The president praised Pulte on X days before, writing this: congratulations to William Pulte on the outstanding job he's doing. Keep moving forward, William. Don't let the radical left weaklings stop you. Joining me now is the man himself, Federal Housing FHFA Director Bill Pulte. Bill, good to see you. Thank you so much for being here. What was your takeaway after what you saw yesterday? And you will be taking an official tour of the Fed building tomorrow with OMB Director Russ Vought and White House Deputy Chief of Staff James Blair. What are you expecting? What do you want to see?
Well, we have the most popular president in history. He just won a landslide mandate from the American people to be president of the United States. He's literally the most popular president we've ever had. But we have one guy in the form of Jerome Powell who just thinks that he is maybe more important than the economy and more important than everybody else by being a stubborn mule, as President Trump has called him. So it's a big problem, and and Jerome Powell needs to resign. As it relates to the building, you know, they just built the Buffalo Bills Stadium for $2.2 billion, but somehow Jerome Powell has spent $2.5 billion. I think by the time it's done, it's going to be way higher than that. So I think there needs to be an investigation. I think that maybe he lied to Congress. I think things are going to get a lot worse for Jerome Powell, and it'd just be better off if he resigned.
You know, a lot of people worry when the independence of the Fed is shaken, and I want to get your take on what's cause to fire him. I mean, if he's spending $2.5 billion and he could actually account for that and prove why he needed that money to update these buildings, which is what he's saying, would you be able to use that as cause to actually fire him?
Well, I don't want to get any specifics, and I would refer you to the White House and to the lawyers. I would say, from my perspective, I do believe that there is for cause. But I can say personally that, you know, I've been in construction my whole life. I have never seen a construction site like this one. I mean, it really doesn't make any sense. They're taking down the marble. They're taking down the steel. I mean, these are very durable building materials. That's what they are. It doesn't make any sense what has gone on. And frankly, I think we need to look into who's behind these contracts, who knew what when. How much involvement did Jerome Powell have, or how much involvement didn't he have? I mean, it's very concerning. You know, you got a guy who's supposedly in charge of our entire economy. I mean, I'm in charge of $7.8 trillion at Fannie and Freddie. You have an obligation. You know, if we have a building renovation at Fannie or Freddie, you know, that reflects poorly on you. And this guy, somehow, he wants to get a hall pass for spending $2.5 billion on a government building. It just doesn't make any sense. And I think we're in the beginning innings of understanding what's going on here.
Well, it's really interesting because President Trump has talked so much about the debt and deficits that we face, $36 trillion in debt, $2 trillion in deficits, and he wants rates to go lower to lower the cost of this capital. But Chairman Powell keeps talking about the fact that his mandate is inflation and jobs growth. Shouldn't he also be looking at the cost of this capital, given the fact that we are spending more on interest just to hold on to this debt and carry it over than we do on defense spending?
Well, of course, but he should also be listening to President Trump. Not only is he the most popular president, but he's probably 100 times more successful in business and in life than Jerome Powell. But somehow Jerome Powell thinks that he knows better than the President of the United States, who's the best businessman that's ever been in the office. You know, one of the only ones who's ever been in office. It's totally crazy. But this is a guy who's very arrogant. He's very pompous. And frankly, I think he's going to resign, Maria. I think it's just a matter of time.
So you think he'll resign before May, which is when the term officially ends?
I do think so. I think that, you know, you look at what's going to be coming out, I think, with regard to this building. You look at what he's done. I mean, he's really holding the American people hostage with these rates being high. You know, I oversee Fannie and Freddie, Maria, and I can tell you it is absolutely hurting people's ability to get a mortgage. You know, you have the Fed funds rate at 4.5%. Meanwhile, inflation for the last 3 months is running at 1.6%. President Trump has absolutely crushed inflation. I mean, when we had President Biden, this thing was totally out of control. President Trump, in a matter of months, did almost a miracle with getting inflation down. Yet the Fed funds rate is not reflecting that. So this is a big issue for the American people. I think the president will not stop. He should not stop. It's not in his nature to stop. He will win. The president will win, and this economy will boom. It's just I hope that it happens sooner rather than later.
And it is very true, Adam Johnson, that right now the macro story is booming due to President Trump's policies. And, you know, this priority that the president has on growth. The one area that is still shaky is housing. And, well, it's a supply issue, but it's also a rate issue.
Yes.
Bill is right on the rate.
And that's exactly the whole problem. You got to get rates down because you cut rates and all of a sudden home affordability goes up.
Right.
So that's the one sort of block in the wall that bothers all of us. And I think, you know, that's what we're hearing from Mr. Pulte.
Yeah,
so, yes.
You know, and he's complaining about President Trump's tariffs. Meanwhile, they just resulted in a budget surplus for the month of June.
And
Bill,
I'll tell you this.
Yeah, go ahead.
Maria, you know, one of the things that's crazy is that you have the situation where he says, oh, tariffs, you know, are causing inflation. He has no data to support it. Nothing. You know, he says, oh, we're going to be data dependent. He has no data. He's hallucinating this stuff. I will say one thing that's also concerning, Maria, is that because interest rates are high, it actually increases inflation in home building, from my perspective, from the different CEOs I'm speaking with. Because what happens are when when interest rates are high, the builders constrict supply because they're concerned about selling the inventory. And so that's what's also concerning about this is he's having enormous effects, not just on home building, housing, but also car loans, credit loans. And frankly, if he probably had a credit loan or a credit card or a car loan, maybe he would care. But this is really hurting real people.
Well, people all over the map have told me they do think that Jay Powell is political. And I know that President Trump has called him too late, Powell, because he's not cutting interest rates. But he's also called him political. And it's hard to think otherwise, given the fact that he did cut rates right before the last election. And, you know, I don't know if we needed to see a cut then, but right after the election, when President Trump won, he was done cutting rates. Realtors and developers in New York City are warning now about New York City mayoral candidate Zohran Mamdani's housing policies bill. They say that they could create further housing shortages in New York. Mamdani's policies include a freeze on rent, building 200,000 new publicly subsidized housing units, and fast-tracking affordable housing projects. Bill, your reaction?
Well, this guy in New York, you know, this is a consequence of people like Jay Powell, right? Because the constituents of New York are very upset because they can't afford housing. And so they come up with crazy ideas like what's going on in New York because people like Jay Powell keep the Fed's funds rate at 4.5%, keep mortgage rates artificially high when inflation's at 1.6%. So in some ways, you know, Jerome Powell's policies are actually inflaming some of this stuff. So a Fed chair can't come soon enough. I think the Fed chair will be able to reduce rates dramatically. The Fed chair will have to reduce rates dramatically, and I think you will see housing get resolved. I think you'll have the best housing market you've ever had in this country, and I think you'll have an economy that will boom, the likes of which we've never seen. I mean, Trump #1 was amazing, but I think Trump #2 economy will just be otherworldly. We won't believe it, in my view.
All right, let's check rates right now, because mortgage rates right now are sitting at 6.75% as of last week. That's slightly up from the week before. Redfin is reporting that new home listings have hit the lowest level since October of 2023, falling 3.2% in June. So you've got a rate problem, but you've also got a supply problem. Existing home sales ticking higher from the month before. Bill, how would you assess the housing market right now?
Well, people are optimistic that President Trump has come in and crushed inflation. You know, there was a whole debate about what will happen with drywall, what will happen with lumber, what will happen with roofing supplies. And if you recall, people were saying, oh, it's going to impact housing. We haven't seen that in the data. It hasn't. Inflation hasn't happened in construction as a result of the tariffs. So he has absolutely not only won on the tariffs, but he's crushed inflation. So now really the only thing is this Fed's funds rate. I mean, why is it at 4.5%? Just mathematically speaking, right? Like Jerome Powell, who's a lawyer, and maybe that's why he doesn't understand math, but, you know, he's supposed to be a smart guy. Interest rates 4.5% when inflation's at 1.6%. It's almost like he's trying to crash President Trump's economy. He won't be successful, but it's almost like he's trying to do that. And it's very frustrating because at Fannie and Freddie, we have people all day trying to underwrite loans, trying to get, trying to get the housing market booming again. And you got a guy sitting up there in a $2.5 billion renovation, which is a mess, holding these rates way too high.
Yeah, well, it certainly doesn't appear that Jay Powell wants to help President Trump anytime soon with regard to policy on his end. Bill, it's great to see you. We'll be watching your work as usual. Thank you, sir. Bill Pulte joining us.
All right, so Stephen Moore is warning that Mamdani's radical agenda would send the city into economic freefall, driving out the wealthy, shrinking the tax base, pushing the middle class further into the red. It is already happening. We've been watching it. Businesses are in a holding pattern. They're waiting to see if a Marxist is going to be the next mayor here. Even Hakeem Jeffries, the House Minority Leader, reportedly walked away from a face-to-face meeting unimpressed with Mamdani the commie. But Mamdani isn't just a flash in the pan. He's a red flag, a warning of what happens when economic fantasies collide with reality and real people pay the price.
In the Biden years, at least, that was when it was last surveyed, Gen Z had more favorable attitudes to socialism than capitalism, which to me spells the right answer. You can bash Mamdani or the other side all we want. What we're missing is making a positive case for capitalism itself. And if we're being honest, that's something that even the GOP at times has now in recent years gone soft on.
And it's something that we talk about a lot on the show. Capitalism versus socialism. What is at stake? This is a battle that's going to go on for decades to come. But Kevin, I want to come to you first because the concern here is that fringe fringe progressives like AOC, squad-like members like this character Zohran Mamdani, are spreading their tentacles. If all of a sudden he takes New York, and even if he can't implement his policies, but he's just, you know, a flailing socialist and he's leading this city, that really sends a pretty strong message.
It does, and I'm a policy guy, and I have to disclose something. I'm here in New York for 2 days. I reached out to his people last night and again this morning. I asked for a face-to-face meeting while I was here. Obviously, he's not here. He's in Uganda right now. But I also got a message back saying no interest in meeting, which is, for me, at least his people said that. I don't know if it's got to his ear yet. I'm quite shocked. He should take as many meetings with people like me as he possibly can. I want to find out how much of his policies are rhetoric and how much are reality in case he becomes mayor. This is a very important city for me and all investors. I would think that he would want to listen at this point because I feel I have some very good advice for him, particularly on his policies around real estate and housing and development of technology and data centers and all of that in New York and New York City. But I was very disappointed. And I expect it's fine to blow me off. I don't think it's good for him. Not a good move, in my view. And I hope he hears this now.
I believe it was last week. He was supposed to sit down with some of the business leaders. They didn't all show up themselves, but the ones who did probed him about what he was all about. He didn't back away from any of it, by the way. He kind of doubled down, and he does it with a very sort of Gavin Newsom, snaky-like smile. Right. Adam, I want to get your take because there will be real financial implications here. Again, regardless of whether he can see the policies through or not, just of having somebody who is a socialist as a figurehead mayor here. So, I mean, we've already seen capital flight here. Right. Businesses will leave more. High earners will also leave. What happens to the city? What happens to Wall Street?
Well, I'm taking this all with a grain of salt. I don't think that he ultimately will become mayor, and I'll tell you why. Only about 500,000 people voted for him. 500,000 in a city of 12 million. In other words, that's fewer than 5%, right? So very few people show up for these primaries. And so I think the people who do show up are the ones who really care. They're motivated. And we know that that fringe really cares. So, yes, he won the nod from the Democratic Party. I don't think ultimately there are enough Democrats who are behind him. Hakeem Jeffries still has yet to sign on. And they actually did meet Kevin, right? Isn't that incredible? That Hakeem Jeffries, right, in theory, the leader of the party. And the other thing that gives me cause for pause is, remember, in this city of 12 million people, New York City, there are 1 million Jews. And he is someone who has been adamantly anti-Jewish. And I can't imagine the Jewish community is just going to roll over and let him come marching in.
I've been doing some informal polling on that. You've got older Jews who are very against what he is dishing out, and they stand by Israel. Some of these younger Jews that have come up through the college campuses and through the systems, they're the ones that are kind of pushing for him. And they're voting for him because they're anti-Trump, they're anti-Benjamin Netanyahu. They think they're fascist.
And apparently anti-Israel.
And they're anti-Israel in their own interests. So that's one point. But I just want to push back on the polling a little because I understand what you're saying about the primary. But the polling right now, he's got roughly 30%. You've got 3 other candidates. You've got Cuomo, you've got Adams, you've got Sliwa. If they all stay in the race, they split the rest of the vote, he actually could win.
I suppose that's possible, but do you really think that the powers that be are going to let that happen?
I hope not. Where are the powers?
I mean, eventually there's a runoff. You know, you can't have someone, you go head to head. You know, you can't just have a ticket split 3 different ways and then the one who got the most votes, especially if you can't even get a majority.
Right.
I don't know, the powers that be is an interesting statement.
Well, it depends who they are. If they're the people who are mixed into this race, Andrew Cuomo thinks he's a power that is or will be.
Maybe people who think
but he also thinks he's a martyr, Brian, and he thinks that he is going to win this race. He's staying in it, and he's saying if a socialist takes over New York City, even he would have to leave and go to Florida.
Yeah, and apparently he's joking about that. He wanted to make clear that he's committed. This is why I disagree with you on whether Mamdani's going to win. I don't want him to win, for sure. He's the last person. But the people he's running against are so ineffective, and they're so unimpressive. I mean, Andrew Cuomo is hanging out with, this is probably why he didn't want to meet with you, because Cuomo's hanging out with the Hamptons crew, okay? And he's talking to these guys, and he's saying, if this guy becomes mayor, I'm going to leave town. And it's like, How in the world, as a guy who used to run New York State and now wants to run the city, can you say, I'm going to get out of this place if I don't win? I mean, even if you're joking about that, that is the stupidest thing you can say.
Yeah.
And it tells me that he is so out of touch. And I think Mamdani is like, look, let Cuomo meet with the Hamptons crowd. And I'm gonna advertise about that, and I'm gonna nail him on that. And I'm not gonna talk to Kevin O'Leary because I don't want to be anybody who's near the quote-unquote rich elites. And he's gonna take, in a four-man race, he's gonna take just enough in a four-man race to win on that basis. And that's why I think you got to take what he's doing really seriously right now.
I do, but I bring jobs. That's bipartisan. I create jobs. That's what I want to talk to him about. Even AOC, even Elizabeth Warren, they'll take a meeting because they understand the value of job creation. And he should too. The worst thing, if he becomes mayor, all these people remain unemployed in New York. That's what they're complaining about. That's who he's appealing to. You got to get guys like me to come here and invest our capital to create jobs. Period.
He doesn't want private sector. He wants government jobs. He wants people working for the state, living in state housing, eating state food. You're like the antithesis of that. Why would he like you?
This is also why his message is a problem, because it is hypocritical to a certain degree. He's saying he wants to solve an affordability crisis, Kevin, but you're not going to do that if people aren't working and they're not thriving. If everybody is just relying on the government, the city goes.
I have a daughter living here in New York. She does not want to go down by the river and eat government cheese.
Right.
She wants a job. And a lot of young people want jobs. And they listen to his rhetoric, and I agree it's fringy. But at the end of the day, he would be very wise to listen to his advocates and those that want to question his policies. That's me.
Right.
I'm just one guy. If he doesn't want to take a meeting with me, that's fine. But I think he's missing out on all the other investors that need to talk to him. I need to know what's real and what's BS about him.
Yeah,
that's what I care about.
Well, I have to say, your daughter may be an exception. There are a lot of young people who would like to get fed by the government, at least to start, who would like to work for the government. They see the government as a solution. And the idea that we can rely on the people in charge to take care of this, I think, is naive. We've seen the Republicans. They're not responding to this issue. They think it's a one-off situation. I don't think that at all. We're already seeing socialist candidates popping up in Washington state. Chicago is essentially run by a socialist. This is something the Republican Party has to meet head on. And we need to do it by talking about the benefits of capitalism. It's not just about efficiencies. Republicans always talk about how it'd be so much better to have companies run businesses. True, but what about the moral benefits of capitalism? People become wealthy. They can pilot their own ship. They take charge of their own life when they own their own company. That is a massive benefit that needs to be explained, in my view.
And there are also a lot of lessons to be learned from countries that people have fled from. They've come here because they want to get away from socialism. Telling those stories, I think, is usually really helpful for people, because you sign up for a bill of goods. It happens every time there's regime change, whether it's political or philosophical, or even religious in some cases also. People sign up for something. They never tell you what you're really going to get until you get it and you realize you made a big mistake and there's nothing you can do to undo it.
You know, the least happy people this weekend, though, I think, were the people of Florida finding out they might get Cuomo.
Right.
They're probably building a wall, right? They're building a wall in Florida right now.
Ouch.
President Trump securing a $550 billion trade deal with Japan. And folks, this is not just a handshake and a headline. This is a blue-collar economic windfall.
But I just signed the largest trade deal in history. I think maybe the largest deal in history with Japan. I always say it has to be great for everybody. It's a great deal. A lot different from the deals in the past, I can tell you that. But we're doing really well as a country. We're strong. We have a lot of money flowing in.
Welcome to the Big Money Show. I'm Daga McDowell, joined by my co-hosts, Jonathan Hoenig, Brian Brimberg, Jackie DeAngelis, and with us for this entire hour, John Lonsky, Lonsky Group founder and economist extraordinaire. 15% tariffs, 90% of the profits flowing right back into the United States. Japan will open its economy to U.S.-made automobiles and agricultural products. President Trump says it will create hundreds of thousands of American jobs, not consulting jobs, not human resources directors, actual make stuff jobs, building automobiles, cars, growing food, exporting American energy. Leverage, pressure, and results. The president is already pivoting to the European Union, and Brussels is scrambling to avoid a 30% tariff. The president is flipping the script, and American workers are cashing in. John, how do you see this? Japan, critical trading partner, critical ally of the U.S., and this deal gets done, and the Treasury Secretary, Scott Bessent, does deserve a good chunk of the credit here.
I concur with the U.S. equity market and the Japanese equity market. I think today it was up by more than 3%. Some of the auto stocks in Japan posted even bigger gains. What really stands out to me, as far as the American worker is concerned, is that this inflow of capital, that $550 billion that Trump is speaking about, you know, that's telling me that perhaps Japanese automakers will increase their presence in the United States, build more cars, and that implies more manufacturing jobs for Americans. This is definitely a positive.
I'm familiar with the Japanese automakers throughout the South because they were in right-to-work states, right?
Yep.
You're going, yep, shaking your head. Continue.
Well, I think it's the auto part of this is interesting, and I'm kind of curious to see where it goes because, you know, Japan was really concerned about 25% hitting their autos, and those are not. They've got a lot of auto manufacturers in the South. They've got a lot of manufacturing outside of the U.S. as well, so that's an issue in terms of tariffs. But the interesting question now is what does it mean for Canadian and Mexican automobiles that have U.S. content in them? And this is what I think this could be the roadmap for that because it went from 25% to 15%. Isn't it funny that everyone's breathing a sigh of relief at 15%? This is total Trump, right? Because if he would have come into this thing months ago and said, I want a 15% tariff, I'm sure everybody would have melted down about that and said, that's terrible. It's got to be lower than that. But because he came in at these higher levels, very Trumpy, and 15%, the market's like, oh, good, 15%. But so, Jonathan, let me just say, but I think Canada and Mexico now are saying, okay, how do we get in on the 15%? And the big three automakers want to see that happen, so we'll see if it's a template.
Isn't that the issue, though? I mean, if the goal is to get people to manufacture in the U.S., at 15%, at 20%, it's still profitable to import those foreign goods. So it almost seems like, you know, you have to have the tariff be something like 30, 40, 50% if you actually want to bring that manufacturing home. A lot of importers will say, okay, 15, 10, 20% we can kick in. 50, 60 we cannot. So is this really going to actually achieve the president's goal to bring manufacturing home?
As I said earlier, I think the important point is there seems to be some implication of increased direct investment in the U.S. economy by Japanese companies. When I used to have a full head of hair like you, back in the early 80s, Ronald Reagan was president. He was under pressure to place tariffs on Japanese automakers because they were overtaking the U.S. auto market. But instead of what the Japanese automakers agreed to do was to begin to establish these manufacturing plants in, you know, Tennessee, wherever, Alabama, and they did that in place of having to have these tariffs placed upon them. Japanese auto stocks increased sharply today, and that's because Japanese investors, global investors, are convinced that these Japanese automakers, the Toyotas and the like, have the profit margins needed to absorb a lot of these tariffs without suffering unduly. And they got that uncertainty out of the way.
And just go ahead.
Go ahead. No, it's okay.
No, go ahead.
I was just going to say, if they manufacture here, to Jonathan's point, then they don't, or they manufacture components and things, and that's what this investment part of it is about, then they don't have to pay anything. So that's the incentive. I mean, 15% is still more than zero, which I think is positive. But I just wanted to talk about the access part, Dagan, because the investment here in the United States is important. It's going to create jobs. But President Trump and his team have been talking about, you know, access to foreign markets. This is what they want for China, for example, to open things up so that we can do more trade over there. We can sell more of our goods over there. And I think that that piece of this is interesting, too, because as these deals come out, if they do serve, Brian, to your point, as a template, it sort of lays the foundation for, you know, the other countries that we're negotiating with right now. You know, I go back to that New York Post cover. I'm not tired of winning yet, and the market likes this deal.
one of my questions would be, what type of motor vehicles do the Japanese want to import from the United States? Maybe pickup trucks, being something, some specialized vehicle? I have some questions about that.
Well, it sounds like they get their choice now because there's not going to be a tariff.
And you can't underestimate the importance of Japan as a trading partner. You know, they are our biggest foreign investor is Japan, and our number 5th biggest importer. So this is a very vice versa positive relationship for Americans. And the fact that, you know, like it or not, the fact is these tariffs are higher than they were just 10, 15 years ago. Yes, I know they're down from 24% to what, 15% now, but they were 2% before Trump came to office. Right. So tariffs are still up quite a bit.
And tariffs are a sales tax. And when you tax more of something, you get less of it. And, you know, quite frankly, but I think we're seeing right now as a first step as broadening the tax base for the U.S. government. Who knows? There might be a further broadening in the future as a means of trying to close that federal budget gap.
I think that sales tax thing, though, is overplayed a little bit in terms of where do the costs get passed on. I just think that was like the big boogeyman when this all started. You're all getting a big tax. Watch your prices go up. And I just don't think that's played out. Now, maybe it'll play out. But and Jonathan, just on your point about the tariffs and 10 to 15%, and Jackie, I think, is going here. 10 to 15%, I still think is a big encouragement for companies to look at relocating to the U.S. I mean, it's not nothing. I don't think the president wants to completely cut off the flow, and I think he likes revenue more than anything, and that's what the 10 to 15% will get you. But every company is on notice. If you want to make your life simpler now and in the future, because I think the American people are with the president, you should look at doing it in America. To me, that is the most crystal clear message the president has sent economically in this term so far.
And who's our biggest trade adversary? It's not Japan nowadays, it's China. Is this sending a message to China? And do we really want to have foreign direct investment from Chinese companies in the United States? I wonder. We have a military problem with them, national security problems.
Well, I mean, well, one thing is for sure is that the certainty is a positive. And I think to your point, John, that's one reason that you're seeing equity markets both at here and at home up today, because, you know, markets and investors can start to plan even a little bit long term. With all respect to the president, he's talking, well, in 30 days we could have this, and 60 days we can have that. As investors, we're looking much more further out from that. So the fact that we have some certainty here, that to me says why the market.
You know, the president also did a Truth Social post, and I don't have it in front of me, but he said something very interesting today. He said, I will, in response to the Japan deal, I will trade tariff points for market access. I don't know if you saw that post. And I thought that was such an interesting post from a certainty standpoint, from a where he's going standpoint. That was one of the first times I've heard him say, I will give up on tariffs, which you know he loves, because he wants more than anything market access for U.S. goods. I do think investors like that kind of message because it is an access openness message.
And so this all gets to what we were talking about yesterday about growth and the overall economic engine that he's trying to build here. I don't think you can't really put tangible values necessarily on how much they're going to take from us. But if every country he's negotiating with starts taking more goods, it starts to become, you know, it's significant. We were even talking about tariff revenue. Nobody was expecting $100 billion so far, or $300 billion by the end of the year. So these are aspects, and also it goes back to the big, beautiful law, Dagan, because at the end of the day, we need that growth engine to pay for some of the stuff that was in there. And this is how the balancing act happens.
You mentioned the tax of the tariffs, and you might have covered this yesterday, but GM, General Motors, is eating the tariffs. That it reported $1.1 billion in off operating income because of the tariff. Wait, let me finish. That was a 32% quarterly drop, and they absorbed rather than raising prices this quarter.
That's right.
So their shareholders ate
on the prices, right? The shareholders are getting hit.
I'm agreeing with you that it's not a free lunch, that the money shows up somewhere.
And there's less money for investment spending on the part of GM.
One other thing I wanted to add in terms of how unique the Japanese deal is, and this is straight from the Treasury Secretary, that what kind of brought this deal together at the last minute. It was the elections were on Sunday. The LVP did slightly better than expected, although it doesn't have a majority. And then the Japanese government was ready to come up with a deal. That's directly from an interview that Scott Bessent did. And then the president brings the Japanese trade team into the Oval Office. But the trade team came up with a unique financing mechanism to provide equity, credit guarantees, and funding for major projects in the United States. That is all, and that is in addition to foreign direct investment. All of this is new capital. And he was kind of suggesting that if the European Union wants to get a deal done, you might want to step up with something similar.
Right.
I will just leave it at that.
Police are searching for a second suspect accused of shooting an off-duty Border Patrol officer during an attempted robbery in New York City over the weekend. The officer shot in the face during an ambush, but he is expected to survive. One illegal immigrant under arrest. DHS revealing he illegally crossed into the country in 2023. Extensive rap sheet. Charges like grand larceny, assault, armed robbery. DHS says ICE officers have seen an 830% increase in assaults between January and July compared to last year. Joining me now is Lieutenant Christopher Olivares. He is a member of the Texas Department of Public Safety. And Lieutenant, I want to get your reaction. Have you seen an escalation of attacks on any of your agents?
Well, good morning, Cheryl. So first off, when I saw this video, it's very disturbing to see the fact that a off-duty CBP agent was attacked, was shot in the face, and also just the courage that this agent had just to return fire and shoot one of the suspects and be able to identify one of the suspects, as you just showed right there, with a lengthy criminal background. It really shows the result of catch and release policies from the last 4 years. Where I live in the Rio Grande Valley, we had just several weeks ago, there was several Border Patrol agents that were ambushed going to work at a Border Patrol station in McAllen, Texas. And I think this really just shows the escalation of violence towards agents, whether they're ICE agents, Border Patrol agents, or law enforcement in general, that are actually enforcing laws when it pertains to immigration or even criminal legal immigration. When it comes to us, as far as a state police agency, we have not seen any violence towards our troopers. But again, we are not out of the clear, as we're seeing right now how the violence has been able to escalate. Even back last month, when we had these protests and riots in LA, that violence escalated from rocks to bottles to now we're actually agents and law enforcement is being shot at. So again, it goes back also to the rhetoric that's being used, those that oppose any type of immigration, legal immigration, criminal immigration, those that are opposed to ICE agents, those that are opposed to enforcing the rule of law. When you have those individuals that are radicalized and that are looking at these elected officials making these just very disturbing and dangerous statements towards agents, it's going to escalate that violence, and we're seeing that right now. But I can tell you for a fact in Texas, as far as Texas law enforcement, we are committed to protecting and supporting our ICE agents, our Border Patrol agents. That's one thing that our Governor Abbott made very clear, is that zero tolerance in Texas. We are a law and order state, and we will hold anybody accountable and hold them to the extent of the law if they attack or even threat any type of law enforcement officer, that's including ICE agents or Border Patrol agents.
And there's a lot happening in Texas, and I'm going to get to that in a second with you. But I want to ask you about what happened in California, because Border Patrol agents raided a Home Depot in Sacramento. 11 illegal aliens were arrested in the raid. 5 had a criminal history. 3 of them convicted felons. Plus, Democrats are now mad about this new plan by the Trump administration to house illegal migrants at military bases in New Jersey and Indiana. The Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth announcing that parts of Joint Base McGuire-Dix Lakehurst in New Jersey and Camp Atterbury in Indiana are going to be repurposed and used as, quote, temporary soft-sided holding facilities. Lieutenant, I also had on the program Border Czar Tom Homan. And one thing he told me, and this really got my attention, he said, I'm with the president on finding more facilities across the nation. He said, we need the beds. He's like, we got to get like 100,000 beds, is what he told me, even more. We've got the money to do that. We've got to expand this program. Your reaction?
Well, Tom Homan is absolutely correct. I mean, you got to have the bed capacity in order to house these criminals that are being apprehended or being arrested by ICE agents because of these mass deportations. If we don't have the bed facility or the bed capacity, then what ends up happening is you're going to have to release these individuals and then go back out there and look for them again. So Tom Homan is actually right. I mean, he knows what he's, I mean, obviously this is a man of experience. He knows what he's saying. He knows the logistics, and that's why it's very important to have that bed capacity or detention capacity, in this case, to house these criminals. You know, going back to the Home Depot raid, whether it's a Home Depot or worksite enforcement, criminals are going to be in those environments. And we're seeing that right now. 50% of those that were apprehended did have lengthy criminal backgrounds. That's where you're going to find the worst of the worst. It's not just, you know, looking for them, you know, in jails or those that are being released in jails. It's those that are being released into the communities. And this is what we're seeing right now, especially in these sanctuary cities and states, when you don't cooperate with ICE agents, when you can simply notify them when a criminal is being released from a jail so that an ICE agent can apprehend that criminal safely. Now they're having to go out into these communities. And now we're seeing that, where we're seeing these acts of violence, these threats, the assaults on ICE agents because of that. And again, you would think that those that are opposed to it will want safer communities, will want our law enforcement to be safe. But in this case, that is not the situation right now. And that's why we're seeing these threats escalate to over 830% towards ICE agents.
And there's been a lot of criticism against Democratic lawmakers for the kind of language that they're using, which many critics say is inciting more violence against ICE agents, Border Patrol agents who are just out there. These are brave men and women that are just trying to do their job and trying to keep our country safe, and they're being attacked by U.S. citizens. So that's a big conversation that's happening right now. As promised, I want to get back to Texas with you. So Kirk County officials say nearly 100 people who had still been listed as missing after the deadly flash flooding on July 4th have been found safe. 3 individuals now are still missing. Can you give us an update on where the state is this Monday morning as obviously the cleanup continues?
You know, Shara, I spent maybe the last couple of weeks there in Kirk County, where obviously this flooding took place, and I can't tell you, it's even hard to put into words just the fact that this community in the face of devastation has come together, unified. First responders from everywhere, not just Texas, but across the country, coming together, law enforcement, firefighters, EMS personnel, volunteer search, people that want to help the search efforts with our law enforcement really is quite remarkable. The countless hours, the fact that terrain that you're seeing there in the video, I mean, we faced so many challenges as law enforcement during those couple of weeks looking for people. The fact that it still continued to rain the week after, that made it more challenging for search and recovery efforts, the debris, and just the wide span that we're having to search, over 40 miles. You're talking multiple counties having to search for the missing people and try to, get them accounted for and to bring some type of hope to the families. Right now, obviously, that number was well over 100 when Governor Abbott was there. Now we got that number down to 3. And the governor made it very clear as well, is that we are committed to find every single person and make sure they're accounted for. We want to bring some hope to those families, those grieving families. And one thing is more impactful is, once we find every single person, law enforcement that's not from the area, people that are not from the area, they're going to leave. Those that are still going to be there, those that work there, the city manager, the sheriff, the community members, the families, they are still going to have to live in those communities and actually, feel those impacts in the coming years, not just, rebuilding, but also a sense of just grieving for their loved ones that they've lost. And that's one thing that we want to provide to those families is a sense of hope and the fact that we are standing together. And I think that really underscores Texas strong, as the governor put it very, very well, is that we always come together no matter what the situation is. And that's what we did in these last couple of weeks in Kirk County.
And I'm so glad that you mentioned the fact that the people of Texas, they are strong, they are family, they have their faith, and there's going to be years of rebuilding ahead. And I think it's important that people don't forget what happened there, and that people stay there as best they can or donate money, which our viewers have been doing.
Exactly.
Yeah, Lieutenant Christopher Oliveras, thank you so much for being here. And again, prayers out to the folks in Kirk County.
Thank you, Cheryl.
Well, following Fox's initial donation to the Kirk County Flood Relief Fund, our generous viewers have answered the call to action across all of our platforms. They've raised $7 million to aid Central Texas communities. You can still donate. There's a lot that still needs to be done. Visit go.fox/TXFloodRelief or scan the QR code on your screen to support relief and rebuilding efforts there. President Trump and Xi Jinping could reportedly be meeting ahead of the APEC summit in South Korea in late October or on the sidelines of the event itself. Both countries are still trying to negotiate and end the escalating tariff conflict. The U.S. now allowing NVIDIA to sell its AI chips to China, which could help bring down U.S.-China trade tensions. I want to bring in Gatestone Institute Senior Fellow Gordon Chang. Gordon, your reaction to that, in particular this proposed meeting, because you had said to us last week that the idea that President Trump could go to China would be the worst idea. Now it looks like it's going to be neutral territory between the two leaders if this happens.
Yes, it would be much better, Cheryl, if President Trump meets Xi Jinping on the sidelines of APEC, which is late October, early November in South Korea. Going to China, especially September 3, China wants President Trump to go to that big military parade celebrating or marking the end of World War II. That would be horrible. And the reason is that China's narrative is that China won World War II. And also probably that parade would honor the Chinese who fought in the Korean War against the United States. So going to South Korea would at least be a step forward. But the more important issue is, what do we expect to accomplish by talking to China? We've been talking with China now for more than 5 decades. And for the last 3.5, this has not worked out very well for us.
Yeah, well, again, with that trade deal on the table, and President Trump has said that it's been put in place, that obviously this would be a kind of a relief for the markets, at least. I want to talk about China and Vietnam, because they're holding their first joint Army training exercises this month. This looks like newer military ties for these new countries, but they both got U.S. tariffs to deal with. Chinese Defense Ministry says the exercise will further deepen practical cooperation between the two militaries. What do you make of this? Should we be concerned about this?
I'm not terribly concerned, and the reason is that the Vietnamese need to appease China. That's clear. Vietnam will all say nice things about China, but these are two countries that have been at odds with each other for centuries. And by the way, small Vietnam usually gets the better of these confrontations with China. So the last time that these two countries fought a war was 1979, when China launched a surprise invasion of Vietnam. And Vietnam's third string army really did in China's first string. It was a humiliation for China. The Vietnamese know that. They've been dealing with hostile Chinese for a very long time, and they are able to preserve their borders. So, yes, I think Vietnam clearly wants to make the Chinese happy with these military drills, but I don't think it's enormously significant for Vietnam, and it's certainly not enormously significant for us.
Okay, good. I want to move to this story. This is fascinating, Gordon. Buyers from China have been very active in the U.S. real estate market. According to a new report from the National Association of Realtors, over the last year, Chinese buyers scooped up $13.7 billion worth of homes. Among all foreign real estate buyers, China was at the top with 15% of purchases. That was then followed by Canada, Mexico, India, and the UK. Nearly 12,000 existing home sales were done by the Chinese alone this year. The average purchase price for these buyers, more than $1.1 million. That's compared with all foreign buyers who spent just over $700,000. And then if you look at where they've been buying, get this, California, Maryland, New York, Hawaii, and Georgia, 71% of those buyers from China paid all cash, Gordon. What do you make of this?
Yes. This is fascinating. And if you look at the April 2024 to March of this year period, in other words, the 12 months, Chinese purchases were up 83%. And the only explanation I can come up with is that this is capital flight. Basically, these are wealthy Chinese who want to get their money out, but more important, they want a place to live. We saw this unprecedented surge of Chinese migrants across our southern border in the Biden administration. That, again, were desperate Chinese who want to live in a free society. So this is a sign of China's weakness, and it's also a sign that the Chinese people feel that now is the time to leave their country. So in a sense, this is a warning sign about what's going on inside of China. We see a lot of disturbing indications. And, the money, the Chinese are voting with their feet. and they're voting for the United States, which should make us pretty confident that they see us as the last refuge in the world.
I don't know. Liz Peek, go ahead.
Gordon, I think it's an an astonishing story, although I'm not at all surprised that Chinese are trying to get money out of China. I am surprised at how easy it appears to be, because taking out $1 million, $2 million in cash to buy a house, how does the Chinese government even allow that to happen?
The Chinese government does not allow that to happen. The Chinese rule is that a Chinese national can export 50,000 US a year. But that rule is, oftentimes people are not allowed to take out that money. And so really what's happening is this is wholesale violation of China's foreign currency laws. And this shows you how bad the situation is in China. Periodically we see these surges of money coming out of the country. The last one was in the middle of last decade. Now it's starting to come again. And that is another indication that the Chinese people feel that it is now time to leave their country. You see it from all the rumors about the turmoil in the Chinese political system. We see it when we can look at the economy of China, which isn't growing at the 5.2% pace that they claim for Q2. It's probably about zero or contracting. And the Chinese people just want out of their country.
Gordon Chang, it's fascinating to see. And we're also going to be keeping track of this Trump-Xi meeting. That could be a game changer. Thank you so much for being here, Gordon. Good to see you.
Well, thank you, Cheryl, and belated happy birthday.
Oh, thank you, Gordon. Appreciate it. Another year.
Welcome back. Well, the CapEx comeback in full swing. Business investment is surging at the fastest pace since 1997. Equipment production jumping 17% year over year, powered by retroactive incentives in the president's newly signed Big Beautiful Bill. The administration hoping to boost productivity, lift blue-collar wages, and lay the groundwork for longer-term economic growth. Joining me now with more on all of this and more is the Treasury Secretary of the United States, Scott Bessent. Mr. Secretary, great to see you. Thank you so much for being here.
Always good to see you.
I want to get your take on this CapEx spending boom and what's driving it. We talk so much about AI and this new pivot in terms of technology and its impact across business, as well as the president's policies to bring business and supply chains back to America. Is that what's behind the CapEx boom? How do you see things?
Maria, this is a combination. It's the tariffs bringing back manufacturing to the U.S. It's the full expensing in the One Big Beautiful Bill, which I think is one of the most important things that we did. Companies can do 100% expensing for equipment, 100% expensing for factories. If you bring your factory back here, I think we had big pent-up demand. We are in the middle of this incredible AI boom that, I don't know whether you want to say this is the third, fourth, fifth industrial revolution. So we're seeing the hyperscalers spend like we never have before. And I think what's really gone unheralded here is the Trump administration's emphasis on deregulation. We are making it possible to build things in America again. For years, if you wanted to build a factory, a pipeline, a transmission grid, you were held up by permitting. And President Trump has given, whether it's EPA, the Energy, Interior, a mandate that these permits should get out within a month. So America is building things again. And I tell you, this is the way that countries get rich and stay rich, is through long-term investment and productivity.
Yeah, and we should also point out that the Big Beautiful Bill made the tax cuts permanent. So, it's not a short-term, phenomenon. People and companies look at that and know that this is the way for the long term. I spoke with the CEO of CoreWeave on this program last week and asked him to assess the situation today. And here's what he said. Watch this.
There has never been a cycle that I have been involved with where the power of the demand across society has been at the order of magnitude of what we're seeing here. The businesses need to get their hands on it. The scientists need to get their hands on it. The governments need to get their hands on it. There is a understanding that this technology will be the defining technology for the next stage of human development. And with that in mind, the companies around the world, and there are not that many companies that can actually build and run this equipment effectively. The demand that these companies are under is enormous, and it's the hyperscalers, it's a few other companies kind of that have the capacity to deliver this scale. And one of the things that's really important for people to understand is it's scale that matters, right? Like, it's not that I can build a few computers or I can run a few computers. It's, can I run one of the 3 largest supercomputers on the planet? How quickly can I build it? How much time can I keep it up so that it doesn't break? If it does break, how quickly can I return it to a useful configuration? All of those are the questions that really drive all of the people that are populating the delivery system of this incredible compute resource.
So, Mr. Secretary, that's it in a nutshell, right? This is a new moment when you look at the impact of AI as well. How long-lasting do you expect this CapEx boom to be? Because we're wondering if we're going to see an acceleration of companies lifting guidance. We just heard from General Motors this morning, but they are not changing their guidance because they are worried about a lack of clarity on tariffs. What do you say to that?
Well, a couple of things, Maria, is that I've had the privilege of being in Pittsburgh twice in the past month, and it shows both sides of this CapEx boom. On one side, I went with President Trump, and he announced the U.S. Steel, Nippon Steel deal. Nippon Steel is going to make substantial investments into the existing U.S. Steel facilities in Pittsburgh and then 3 other facilities around the country. On the other hand, I was there last Tuesday for an AI summit, and Pittsburgh is going to become an AI powerhouse because they have power, they have energy, they've got the know-how with the great universities there. So you're seeing it on both sides. Imagine that, steel and AI, and it's a very diversified building boom. We're seeing companies from all over the world want to come in. You mentioned the AstraZeneca, and I can tell you we're about to announce a rash of trade deals in the coming days, and a lot of these trade deals are going to include substantial investments in the U.S., whether it's autos, semiconductors, and pharmaceuticals.
Yeah. Well, you've said that the administration is not rushing these trade deals and that it's more about getting the terms right rather than just meeting deadlines. But we are, 10 days away from your August 1st tariff deadline. You've suggested that the president could extend the clock for countries making real progress on deals. So how hard of a deadline is that August 1st deadline for reciprocal tariffs to return with regard to China?
Well, let's break that down into the 2 pieces. First, I think August 1st is a pretty hard deadline, but what'll happen? Well, for all countries, because what I think will happen is that the tariff level will boomerang back to the reciprocal level from April 2nd. That doesn't mean we can't negotiate when the countries are at the higher level. As a matter of fact, I think President Trump may have created a pretty ingenious strategy here that, if you're working at the high level, you're actually going to work faster. Secondly, China, that deal expires on August 12th, and I'm going to be in Stockholm on Monday and Tuesday with my Chinese counterparts, and we'll be working out and what is likely an extension then. I think trade's in a very good place with China. We're going to be talking about a lot of the other things that our countries can do together. Hopefully, we can see the Chinese pull back on some of this glut of manufacturing that they're doing and concentrate on building a consumer economy. We want to speak to them about the sanctioned Russian and Iranian oil that they're buying, what they're doing to aid Russia in the Ukraine war. So I think we've actually moved to a new level with China where it's very constructive and very we're going to be able to get a lot of things done now that trade has kind of settled in at a good level.
Yeah, I mean, I think you make so many important points there. ahead of this meeting that you're having in Stockholm to hopefully extend the deadline for China. What's most important to you? Because the president has used tariffs on so many levels, not just to raise revenue, but also to try to even the playing field for fair trade for America, but also some of these non-tariff barriers, like what he said in Brazil about the treatment of the former president there. What would be an ideal scenario? What do you want the Chinese Communist Party to do in order to get back or stay at these current tariff levels and get that August 12th deadline extended?
Well, again, we want them to open up. They are imbalanced right now. They're about 30% of global manufacturing and exports. That's unsustainable. And look, they've got 1.4 billion people. With very high savings rate, they have the potential for a big consumer economy. President Trump is remaking the U.S. into a manufacturing economy. If we could do that together, we do more manufacturing, they do more consumption, that would be a home run for the global economy. The other thing, Maria, that President Trump has done, and now the U.S. Senate is acknowledging, there is a lot of bipartisan support for to give President Trump extra authority against Russia on Russia sanctions we're going to see over the coming weeks. But what's important here, now the U.S. Senate agrees with President Trump that tariffs can be used as a negotiating lever.
Yeah.
So what this bill that the U.S. Senate is going to approve is likely that anyone who buys sanctioned Russian oil will be subject to a 100% tariff. And that is 100%. President Donald Trump has changed the narrative here that tariffs can be used for negotiations, away from just economics, but for world peace.
So you believe that these tariffs could actually stop China from buying sanctioned oil from Russia? That's
well,
huge.
It's not just. It's not just China, it's India.
Yeah.
I'm going to be in touch with my European counterparts. The Europeans, have talked a big game about sanctioning Russia, and it'll be very important for the Europeans to also be willing to put on these high level of secondary tariffs for sanctioned Russian oil. I'm confident that they'll do it, but we're going to have some tough discussions to make sure that it is a G7, all hands on deck, everyone's in agreement.
So will you be poised then to extend the deadline past August 1st for the EU if, in fact, you get an agreement that they will, in fact, sanction China and India for buying oil from Russia?
Those are separate negotiation tracks. There's trade, and then there's trying to end this terrible Russia-Ukraine conflict. And in terms of ending the Russia-Ukraine conflict, everyone's on board with that.
Mm-hmm. Secretary, how much revenue have you raised so far from tariffs? I know that we saw a budget surplus in the Treasury in the month of June. Last time we saw a budget surplus was President Trump's first term. Is that largely because of the tariff revenue, and how much have you raised so far this year?
Well, we're closing in on $100 billion. I think we could annualize at $300 billion. So a way to think about that is that's roughly 1% of our U.S. $30 trillion GDP. So that is a big number, Maria, and we didn't get any credit for that in the CBO scoring. I don't agree with the CBO scoring. But CBO scoring did say that there's a chance over the 10-year window we could take in $2.8 trillion of tariff revenue. And the great thing about the June number was not only was it an increase in tariff revenue, we brought down expenses. So it was a great combination: lower expenses, higher revenues. And that's how we are going to get this budget mess that we were left with under control.
Yeah, even as the CBO says, the Trump, a big, beautiful bill, will add $3.4 trillion to deficits. Obviously, the tariff revenue cuts into that pretty substantially.
Well, and look, Maria, that, as we talked about at the top of this segment, we're seeing this CapEx boom. The CBO scoring is static. It's no matter what you do, you raise taxes, you lower taxes, you grow 1.8%. I think we're going to see by the fourth quarter, first quarter next year, I think we're going to see growth numbers with a 3 in front of them, and we're going to see this AI productivity boom start kicking in. So the important thing here is we're going to have high growth, but it's going to be non-inflationary.
Great point. I want to take a break and come back, ask you about the Federal Reserve. Stay right there, Secretary. We pick up the discussion right after this. And we kick it off with the hot topic of the hour. Former President Barack Obama breaking his silence on all the allegations directly from President Trump that he and his administration led the Trump-Russia collusion lie. In a rare public statement, a spokesperson for the former president says this: "Our office does not normally dignify the constant nonsense and misinformation flowing out of the White House with a response, but these claims are outrageous enough to merit one. Nothing in the document issued last week undercuts the widely accepted conclusion that Russia worked to influence the 2016 presidential election, but did not successfully manipulate any votes." President Trump says Obama should be the main focus of a DOJ investigation, along with a group of former high-level officials who also played a part. Watch.
It would be President Obama. He started it. And Biden was there with him. And Comey was there. And Clapper, the whole group was there. Brennan, they were all there in a room. Right here, this was the room. But the leader of the gang was President Obama, Barack Hussein Obama. Have you heard of him? Look, he's guilty. It's not a question. I like to say, let's give it time. It's there. He's guilty. This was treason, and we have all of the documents. And from what Tulsi told me, she's got thousands of additional documents coming. So President Obama, it was his concept, his idea, but he also got it from crooked Hillary Clinton. Crooked is a $3 bill. Hillary Clinton and her group, the Democrats, spent $12 million to Christopher Steele to write up a report that was a total fake report.
The Director of National Intelligence, Tulsi Gabbard, told me on Sunday that more documents are coming out, and they will be out today. They fly in the face of the Obama statement. Joining me now is former federal prosecutor, former DHS Deputy Assistant Secretary, Jonathan Fahey. Jonathan, great to see you. Thank you so much for joining us. Of course, everybody on this program and our audience knows that we pegged this hoax from the start. I've been calling it out for years. What is your reaction now that we see these declassified documents coming out, revealing what we all expected?
Yeah, it's pretty amazing, and the fact that there's still, things are still coming out now showing this is also amazing that it's taken this long. But what it really does show is that, the apparatus, the establishment apparatus and the Democratic Party did everything they could to undermine President Trump's candidacy and also his presidency. And, President Trump talked about the Steele dossier, which was the impetus for a lot of this stuff, was paid for by the Clinton campaign. And remember, they marked it as a legal expense, something that they later say, when Donald Trump marks something a legal expense, it's a major investigation. All of this stinks. And what's interesting about Obama's statement, he doesn't address the fact that Democrats were campaigning on this in 2018, including himself talking about, Russian interference and keeping our elections safe, when they knew the Russians didn't do anything or didn't do anything more than they ordinarily did in elections, but they wanted people to think that the Russians not only interfered but changed vote outcomes and things like that, which was, they never had evidence of that, but they wanted the American people to think that, so they always insinuated that, and they use these terms like meddling and colluding, which aren't even legal terms. It's like they just constantly, there was this constant drumbeat and really undermined their Trump presidency, Trump 45 presidency in so many ways. It's so disgraceful. President Obama would be far better off to take a little more humility and say, hey, there were a lot of mistakes made during our presidency, and the Democratic Party can learn a lot from that. But instead, they're almost doubling down because Donald Trump was never in their club, never in the establishment, and they did everything they could to delegitimize him at every step from the campaign to his presidency.
Well, that's right. And remember, at the time, Donald Trump was saying a lot about the need to, drain the swamp, change the way Washington worked, and they didn't like that at all. They wanted to hold on to their grip on power. But where do you see the criminality? Because this is going to be a criminal investigation. And back then in 2016 and 2017, I was having Devin Nunes on repeatedly when he was the chairman of the Intelligence Committee. And of course, if you're the chairman of the Intelligence Committee, you see things that others may not. That's why when Adam Schiff came out and said that there was collusion in plain sight when he became the chairman of the Intelligence Committee, people stood up and took notice. But he could not have had any information that showed that there was collusion in plain sight, because we know that he saw what Devin Nunes saw. So was he lying? Did he lie to Congress? Is that a felony? Or, because he's a lawmaker, he doesn't have, to be under oath in that way. The same thing with that meeting in early January in President Obama's office, when we know that John Brennan had handwritten notes, and the handwritten notes said that Russia is aware that Hillary Clinton came up with this story that Trump colluded with Russia. He's got all these handwritten notes that we had at the time that I showed on television. Did Brennan lie to Congress? Is that where the criminality is? Where do you see the criminality? And would you expect indictments at the highest order here?
That's where I think you're right. I think where they're going to probably, if there are charges or an investigation, would be things like false statements under oath to Congress, where if you have, evidence that he said one thing and knew one thing here and then goes to Congress and says something else, it's a pretty clean, I don't want to say easily provable, because all these cases end up not being easily provable, but that is sort of a provable type of thing, a perjury, a false statement. Other types of things, are they conspiring to defraud the American people, and other types of things with this information? I think that's more and more complicated, and as you get into that, you get into the issues of immunity and things like that. But I do think things like the false statements, if they are provable, those are the types of things I think that will be investigated further. And it is important to know when something's referred to DOJ, it doesn't necessarily mean it will ultimately result in convictions or charges. It may just mean further investigations, because the agency that has the information doesn't have the ability to investigate or charge. So we don't really know, but I think it's going to be, they're going to dig deeper, probably talk to, interview people, put people under oath, and see where it goes. But it looks really, really bad. And you're right. It was all about protecting the fourth state, the bureaucracy.
Yeah, and of course they had lots of quote unquote useful idiots. And one of the useful idiots were the mainstream media, because they went with it and sent this story viral across the world. But, Caroline Downey, jump in here, because while they were trying to attack Trump, more classified documents reveal that the FBI did not fully investigate Hillary Clinton and the use of her email server. Senate Judiciary Committee Chairman Chuck Grassley said under Comey's leadership, the FBI failed to perform fundamental investigative work and left key pieces of the evidence on the cutting room floor. This was right before and right after a major presidential election. Trump beat her, and they did not even investigate the fact that she had a server in her basement and was sending emails of from all over the world with all this classified information on that server.
Because it was advantaging their preferred political candidate. Maria, I'm always amazed at how much of political opposition today makes Watergate look like a tea party. It's unbelievable. And when you think about the scandal with regarding to the Russian collusion and that hoax, I mean, they were so determined to prevent Trump from attaining or retaining political power that they were willing to try not only falsifying a story, faking evidence that was sent to the media, but impeaching, bankrupting, and of course trying to jail him.
This is the biggest political scandal that anybody has ever seen, followed by the second biggest political scandal, which is the cover-up of Joe Biden and his mental capacity and use of the auto pen to shape policy. Jonathan, thanks for weighing in. Good to see you, my friend. Jonathan Fahey. Stay with us. We'll be right back.
The House Appropriations Committee releasing its 2026 fiscal year national security appropriations bill. Now, the bill delivers a 22% reduction in funding compared to 2025 enacted levels, while further strengthening the national security of the U.S. Joining me now is Florida Congressman Mario Diaz-Balart. He's vice chair of the House Appropriations Committee. So, Congressman, tell us more about this bill. I know that this is very important to you, in particular, that 22% reduction.
Yeah, Cheryl, thanks for the opportunity and to spend this time with you. Look, we are spending a lot less money, but doing more with less, more to help our national security interests, more to confront the adversaries of the United States. Frankly, and all of this with a lot less money, we're still able to do more to help our allies, our friends. So it's a common sense bill which spends less, does more good things. And by the way, we also are not spending money on things that are not only not helping us, but we have for years been spending money on issues and on things that actually have been hurting our national security interests and our allies. So it's another really important step in the right direction on the America First policy.
All right. Well, certainly there is a lot to be done this fall. But this is where I wanted to get your opinion of what Senate Majority Leader John Thune told Maria. He warned her on Sunday Morning Futures that Congress may face a partial government shutdown. Watch.
We are going to need to get appropriations done. That will require some cooperation from the Democrats, and hopefully they will be willing to make sure that the government is funded. We got to do the defense authorization bill. Russia sanctions is something that is on our agenda, and we're kind of working with the White House and coordinating schedules to make sure that we do that at the right time in terms of their negotiations between Russia and Ukraine. But funding the government has to be done before the end of the fiscal year, which is October the 1st.
Do you think Chuck Schumer would like to see a government shutdown come September?
I think he probably thinks that it's beneficial to their political base, the far left of the Democrat Party, and you can kind of see what's happening up there in New York politics. This is a party struggling for an identity. We're going to be waiting to see anxiously what Chuck Schumer and other leaders on the Democrat side decide to do.
So, Congressman, there's 12 appropriations bills or CRs that have to be passed by October 1st, or there has to be a CR by October 1st to avoid a shutdown. But this needs 60 votes. And I'm looking at the breakdown. 53 Senate seats are Republican. They've got to have the Democrats on board for this.
Yeah, we can't do the appropriation bills through reconciliation. Reconciliation only requires 51 votes in the Senate. It's got to be done through the regular process, which requires 60 votes, 60% of the senators to pass. So yes, he's absolutely right. It's going to require ultimately negotiations between the House and the Senate and the White House. And I will tell you, the Democrats are not only in disarray, President Trump is basically living rent-free in their heads. He's so much in their heads, they have a hard time dealing with reality. And they're going to have to realize that unless we're going to have a government shutdown, which would be catastrophic, by the way, they're going to have to negotiate, and they're going to have to start negotiating pretty soon.
Liz Peek, jump in here.
Congressman, is this a template, what your committee has done for other parts of the government? In other words, are we going to see a whole raft of appropriations bills coming out trying to spend less and do more? Because that would really be good news for the American people.
It's actually, look, the leadership of the full committee chairman in the House, Tom Cole, has been amazing. So with the exception of the 3 bills that the president has asked additional funding for, and that's defense, homeland, and veterans, and so those are either flat or getting an increase. So the other bills, you're going to see dramatic spending decreases. We'll see what the Senate can come up with. But again, eventually, we're going to have to negotiate, and the Senate Democrats are going to have to decide whether they want to shut down the government with all of that entails. And by the way, at a moment when China is being so aggressive, this is not the time to, in essence, tie the hands of our military. But we'll see what the Democrats want to do. Yes, we are cutting money on things that are not necessary. We're spending less. And here's the key, and doing more good things with a lot less taxpayer money.
Right, fiscal responsibility, which is what the voters asked for in November of 2024. And I think it's going to be interesting to see how Senator Schumer kind of handles this dance, considering that he's under a lot of pressure because of what's happening here in New York City with the mayor's race. And also, there's this talk of Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez primarying against him. So there's a lot happening with him. But let me move to this with you. Director of National Intelligence Tulsi Gabbard revealing an explosive declassified document drop alleging that the Obama administration created and pushed the narrative that President Trump colluded with Russia to win the 2016 election. Congressman, I want to get your reaction to this document dump from Tulsi Gabbard on Friday and kind of what this means going forward. What do you think?
Well, we've known that there was a concerted effort coming from the administration to basically try to destroy President Trump in his first term. And so that just didn't happen by osmosis. Somebody had to give the order because it was coordinated. It looks like right now, which we all suspected, that this goes all the way to the top, potentially from President Obama himself. And so I'm grateful that this is finally coming out because this was an actual coup attempt. You hear the Democrats talk about threat to democracy. There is a threat, and there was a threat to democracy, but it wasn't coming from the right or for conservatives. It was coming from the left. And it looks like it came all the way, whether it was President Obama or his closest associates, it looks like it went all the way to the White House. It is important that this is investigated. So something like this, an attempted coup in essence, never happens again in the United States of America, the greatest democracy ever.
You know, my colleague Greg Jarrett here at Fox wrote an op-ed at foxnews.com how Obama and his cronies created the Trump-Russia hoax. But he also poses the question, what happens next? And that is the question about what happens next. I mean, you could look at things like treason. You could look at things. I mean, this isn't about collusion anymore, depending on where the investigation goes. Do you think that that's the right path to take right now, or is it more important to focus on the issues, you know, at hand for the nation?
I mean, look, you can do two things at the same time. I think it's very important that we follow the facts and that we take and we follow that trail to wherever it leads. We should not be politicizing, and we have to be, I think, very thoughtful. But you cannot allow, if in fact that happened, which I suspect it did, you cannot allow, in essence, a coup, an organized, planned, aggressive coup to take place, almost take place, and no consequences for that action. But it has to be done seriously. So I tell people, let's see where the facts go. But right now, from what we are able to see just in those documents, it is really damning to the President Obama and his entire administration. And we can do that while at the same time do the other things. And yes, will the Democrats flip out if, in fact, the facts show that there was this conspiracy? With the Democrat leadership in the Senate in particular flip out and be unable or unwilling to negotiate to do other things for the country? That remains to be seen. But look, we have to get our job done. And part of that job is investigating if there was a potential coup attempt.
Congressman Mario Diaz-Balart, sir, it's always great to see you. Thank you for being here on this Monday.
My pleasure. Thanks so much.
All right. Talk to you soon.